Hello, Global Theater. My name is Jerry Fielka. Today is May 10, 2023. We want to thank Rob Grant and his amazing podcast, I'm Probably Wrong About Everything. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here today with David Fewster. Is that the correct way to pronounce it?
Yes.
Where in the heck you calling in from, David?
I am calling in from Tacoma, Washington.
First question is, what is the best thing for a human being?
Hard to say. In my case, I think it's in some ways having no regrets. If you had wanted to do something, to be able to feel that you gave it your best shot. So
Beautiful.
whether there was success or failure in the mix or whatever, if you wanted to do something, you should feel that you gave it your best shot, so there would be like no regrets as you enter your twilight years, as I am doing.
What's your favorite form of information? How it comes into you?
Books. I'm an avid reader. I work at a bookshop. I work at the Tacoma Book Center, which is the largest used bookstore in Washington State. We also do a big internet and collectible trade. But generally, I get a lot of my information about world history. I'm very much into reading artist and literary figure bios because I like the perspective of seeing seeing the world's eye through an artist. But when you read those books, you get a lot of historical perspective about the things that were happening during their time. So I get my history from artist bios, and life philosophy for that matter. So, but anyhow,
That's
books.
cool. Yeah, I like what you said. I agree. And did you become a reader, one, because your parents told you to read, two, because they did it as an example, or on your own?
My parents. I'm originally from upstate New York, and my father was an engineer at Kodak, so he had very much a science orientation. My mom was a secretary. She never went through college. It was not a especially artsy household, let's put it that way. Yeah, but as a boy, I was certainly encouraged to do well at school or whatever, and I did. But my interest tended to be of the more bookish variety, and that was a-okay with my parents. Reading was fine and dandy as long as I kept my grades up. So I just pretty much followed my own devices in terms of reading.
Why do you think humans collect or gather information?
To survive. It's like you want to collect that gossip. If you go around that rock, there's a wolf there that's ready to kill you, and it's like, wow, thanks, you're a reporter.
Yeah.
So
Do you think this need or want to collect information is more innate or more invented?
I think it's innate. It's a survival. Like I said, it's a survival instinct.
Yeah,
Amoebas collect information.
that's right. Fill in the blank, David. I don't know what I think until I
Oh, I mean, the obvious answer is until somebody tells me, but that's too vague for me to really, answer, I guess.
That's all right. Somebody tells me is sort of how I answer it. But McLuhan says, I don't know what I think until I say it. Joan Didion says, I don't know what I think until I write it. Can humans think without language?
No.
Chomsky says that a language is not just words. It's a culture, a tradition, a unification of community. a whole history that creates what a community is. What do you do when language doesn't work? David, when language breaks down, what do you do?
I probably go back to language to figure out how to fix it with language.
Yeah.
I would figure the language that I used was incorrect, and then I would try to, go about it through another avenue, still using language.
Yeah. Your observations of humans in general, are we more thinking beings or more feeling beings?
I'd say that's just part of the yin yang of the human condition. It's they're both there in equal parts.
Yeah. These are two questions from Alan Turing, 1950s. Is thinking a function of the soul?
Well, as an agnostic, and I define an agnostic as someone who, as opposed to an atheist who is certain that there is no soul or no God or anything that would be outside the, realm of what we define as rational thought nowadays. As an agnostic, I'd say, I don't know.
Yeah.
But and in terms of having personal experience with a soul, it's the same as my personal experience with God. I haven't had one. I'm not saying that it can't be around. So perhaps thinking is the soul. The fact that we're able to imagine other things, that have nothing to do with our temporal bodies necessarily. But I guess we'll never know what that distinction is. And when we're dead, no one's ever come back and say, hey, this is how it's going to work, when you get to the other side. So,
Right. The second Turing question is, can machines think?
It depends how you define think, I guess. I think machines can regurgitate and replicate, but I don't think they can actually, if think in an original way.
You're right. Do you more pursue happiness or more pursue meaning?
Probably meaning, because happiness is awfully fleeting, and I found that when I've been unhappy, having some sort of purpose, is a huge comfort. So
Yeah.
I would say take happiness as it comes, but try to do something that has some meaning for you.
Yeah, I got the question from Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, and he says happiness doesn't tend to last, meaning does tend to last.
Well, I should sue him then.
Does the brain more detect consciousness or create it? Like, is consciousness there bubbling away, and are we more so detecting it or more so creating it?
I don't know. I hear that a lot, and I'm always prone to, when I'm on Facebook or something like that, I'll try to quote Samuel Johnson. The Samuel Johnson and the Rock thing.
No, tell me it, please.
I guess Samuel Johnson was walking, the English philosopher and poet and lexiconographer or whatever. Anyhow, he was walking down the street one day, and someone was telling him the philosophy. I don't remember who the philosopher was, Kant or Locke or something like that, where nothing exists except through our own consciousness. And Samuel Johnson kicked a rock and said, by this I refute it, and kicked the rock really hard and moved the rock an inch and hurt his foot. But I think Johnson's point was that, of course this is reality. It hurts me.
Yeah.
And, it's a rock.
It's a rock. That's reminds me of Lily Tomlin said, reality is just a collective hunch. What's faster, speed of light or speed of thought?
I think they move at exactly the same speed.
Audre Lorde, the poet, said, you can't dismantle the master's house using the master's tools. Yvonne Rainer responded and said, you can if you expose the tools. What new tool do you suggest?
I don't agree with that statement at all. I think you can destroy the master's house with his sledgehammer perfectly well. I think the sledgehammer is the only tool for the job. So
Yeah.
there you go.
But let's say, that aside, again, I open some of these questions with cue quotes. It doesn't mean you have to apply them. That quote aside, what tool do you gravitate toward? What tool do you suggest?
Now I've lost the question entirely. Tool to what?
Again, you put in the context you want. What tool do you gravitate towards? What tool do you suggest to other people to do? What you can put it into any context you want.
I guess indifference.
Yeah.
I think indifference is a valuable tool in dealing with just about everything.
That is good. I never got that answer. That is truly a tool. What new toy do you suggest?
I hate all the new toys. I mean, it's amazing I'm on a computer. And every time I see a new toy come out on the market, I literally do not even own a cell phone.
Yeah.
My wife has one, so on the rare occasions I have to use one, she's annoyed that I have to do that. But yeah, I can't even work a cell phone. If you gave it to me and told me to call 911, otherwise, I was going to die in 5 minutes, I wouldn't be able to do it. So I really can't think of any new tools. I'll go back with the sledgehammer and smash the cell phone with that.
That's good. I like that. We have something in common. I have no cell phone either, and I just use my wife's sometimes. But I love the idea of smashing a cell phone. Okay, so what do you worry about when you go to bed at night?
Not nowadays, not much. I mean, worry about my kid in Portland trying to live her best life. Worry about my eventual demise and my various little health ailments. I'm hoping that everyone's my father's still alive, and so I generally tend to think about how he's doing. He's 87. He's doing pretty well, but you never know when people can go. So I guess family members and mortality is what I worry about.
Do you think your dad's longevity is more DNA or more lifestyle choice? I know it's both and it depends, but just your hunch, is it one or the other a little more?
I think DNA trumps lifestyle choice. I mean, my mother died at 78, and she was, didn't smoke, hardly drank. She was diabetic on insulin shots. She was thin as a rail. So, and Dad takes care of himself pretty well too. But I think at the end that people that pass at 58 or something like that, I think DNA definitely does have a bigger factor than the lifestyle choice.
Yeah.
Unless you're drinking like 2 quarts of vodka a day or something like that, then
yeah. McLuhan learned from the poet Ezra Pound that artists are the antenna of the race. They're broadcasting and detecting the hidden psychic effects of our inventions, so we might be able to cope with what we don't like about our inventions. So, David, I asked you the question Marshall probed his whole career. Why do we ignore the hidden psychic effects of our inventions, even though the artists are broadcasting them to us?
Because people are idiots. I mean, that description of artists, it literally fits me to a T. You know, and that's my work. That's what I do. And people have been ignoring me for 40 plus years. So, you know, because they're idiots. You only have to look around to see the idiocy all around us. But the great thing about great artists, not that I count myself in that, you know, band yet, but the great thing about us is that, you know, our work will remain after all the idiots die. So
There you go.
But there'll still be idiots after that.
Yeah. Do artists have moral obligation?
Again, moral obligation is, you know, covers a lot of ground and a lot of meanings. I'm, you know, an artist is an antenna. You know, an antenna is not a moral instrument. I mean, it'll broadcast Rush Limbaugh and Noam Chomsky, you know, on the same set of airwaves. So,
Good.
that, you know, and you know, if an antenna doesn't have morals, then neither, you know, specifically as an artist.
Are you more afraid of new ideas or more afraid of old ideas?
I like new ideas, and I like old ideas, and you know, and it's interesting to see how sometimes they don't seem to mix at all in today's climate. But I'm always interested in them. I mean, one of my heroes, actually, one of my cultural heroes was Johnny Cash. One of the reasons I like Johnny Cash so much was that he was always going out of his cave, you know, and finding out what the young people were doing and what they were thinking. You know, the old Johnny Cash so used to have a whole bunch of stoned hippies on it, which I'm sure the old country music people didn't know what to do with. And you know, look at the end of his life; he's doing a Nine Inch Nails song, and I like to feel that, you know, I, you know, kind of look around and see which way the culture is going nowadays, and you know what the young people are doing, and you know, even if it seems, you know, incredibly stupid to the way that we used to do things, or you know what it was like when I was, you know, 20, I still find it interesting. So I guess in answer to your question, you know, I can look at new and old ideas and see the good and bad in both of them.
Very good. I agree. Can you conjure up your earliest memory ever or one of them?
I think my earliest memories are like waking up in a crib when my mom had a one-bedroom apartment in Rochester, and when she was a single mom before she married dad, you know, later that year. Um, so yeah, I have memories of being in a crib.
Is memory more a curse or more a blessing?
I think it's important to remember things, and you know, and it's important to remember that how you remember things isn't necessarily right. I mean, I'm at the age where, you know, I'll talk to like some old friends who will be trying to remember something that happened like 30 years ago, and it's like our stories, our emphases are, you know, totally different, and you know, it makes you wonder. But you know, as I get older, I find I go down memory lane, and and you know, when I see something, it'll, you know, strike up a bunch of associations and synapses, and you know, I can find myself all over the map with memory. And you know, I don't have a TV either, and so you know, going down memory lane is like my version of watching a show. It's like a steampunk time traveling thing where I can go every place I've ever lived, just being, you know, united by, you know, one thought, you know, about, you know, boiled oysters or something.
Yeah, I love that reference to steampunk. David, tell me someone within your immediate family, then outside your immediate family, just briefly, who had an impact on you, kind of like a role model, and what specifically was that impact?
This has to be in my immediate family.
No, there's no have tos, but if you could, in your immediate family, someone who had an impact, and outside your immediate family who had an impact, and what was that impact?
I don't know. I was never. My family was kind of a, I mean, hate to bash them, but they were kind of a bland, boring Republican middle class family in upstate New York. Dad worked for Kodak. I was initially raised in a very small town, Ontario, New York, that I hated, and then we moved to the more affluent, hip suburb of Penfield, which actually changed my outlook. I mean, in terms of a mentor, I guess Penfield High School was, this is a collective, the students, the teachers, just the general attitude was an awakening for me because it was, so much more cosmopolitan than Ontario, New York. And I was the little skinny, weakling, odd kid out in this farm jock community. And so being able to go to Penfield, which was closer to Rochester and had, more arts programs in high school and stuff like that, that was probably a big influence on my outlook and my ability to, relate in life.
And so, did your parents raise you a particular religion?
Back in those days, I think, especially in Ontario, New York, my feeling is that, families, if you were a family guy and working at Kodak or in a farm community or something like that, you picked a church. You picked a church and went to it because it was just part of being American.
Right.
And so both of my grandparents, my mom's parents were Roman Catholic and sent the kids to Catholic school. Dad's parents were Northern Baptists. And so when mom and dad got married, the compromise, so as not to be, related to either one, they chose Presbyterian. So I was raised in a Presbyterian church from, before kindergarten. I was going there all the way through high school, even, long after I'd stopped necessarily believing any of the nonsense. It was just kind of a social thing. In some ways, I didn't, it was a Presbyterian church in a small community, but both the ministers they had were fairly liberal, and I liked them personally. I mean, one minister we had used to quote Peanuts cartoons all the time, which I thought was charming as a kid because I was a huge Peanuts fan. And the second minister was kind of a younger guy, and he actually played Jesus Christ Superstar for one of the sermons, like right after it came out. And, absolutely nobody over, 30 in that congregation liked that. So they were against that. So my experience with the church was kind of it was a faith organization, but they were also, secular and kind of liberal. And so, I never had a whole bunch of church angst. I just, realized that, I don't believe in this stuff, and, I'm going to be moving on. And to be honest, neither my parents or my grandparents stopped. Both my parents and my grandparents stopped going to church entirely once the kids were out of school. So I think,
Wow.
it was not a religious family in any sense of the word, except for what was conceived as social obligation.
Do you pray?
I do not.
If God exists, what would you like God to say to you after you die?
Welcome to the good place.
Do evil people exist, or does evil use people as a vehicle?
I think evil people exist. It's genetic DNA or whatever, but there are people that are genetically evil.
David, how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? And I'll set it up. Alan Watts says, if you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them. Coppola stole from the mob and the samurai. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer. JFK says, forgive your enemy, but don't forget their name. And Fellini says, I need an enemy. So it's a lot of thought. The basic question is, how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? But first, how would you respond to Alan Watts? If you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them.
Um, I yeah, I think there's there's something in that statement. I mean, you know, if I guess we're focusing on the word acknowledge, where you know, if you try to meet your enemy, you know, try to meet your enemy on his own grounds, and you know, acknowledge him, then you're playing into his or her hands. Um, you, you know, I really don't have that many, you know, there aren't that many enemies lurking around in my landscape or whatever. Say, oh, that's an enemy, or you know, oh, that guy's gonna ruin me, or you know, oh, my boss is horrible, or anything like that. My enemies in life have generally tended to be, you know, close figures that I've since broken off relationships with, and I don't know if you can count that as an enemy or not. I mean, you know, I mean, my way of dealing with them is not to have anything to do with them ever again.
Yeah. Well, Nassim Taleb said games were created to give non-heroes the illusion of winning. In real life, we don't know who wins or loses, but we know we can usually tell who a hero is. So I told someone this and they responded, villains don't think they're bad. They want control. Heroes want freedom. In fact, Gregory Bateson, the anthropologist, said, if the criminal gets caught, does he go, oh, my criminal skills weren't up to snuff that day? Or does he say, whoa, I did something morally or socially wrong? So it's a lot of prompts, but the basic question is, does punishment work?
Yes, I think punishment works. It's certainly a detriment.
Yeah. James Joyce was a first projectionist in Dublin about 100 years ago. He basically checked out. He said, why should I go inside a building and see a movie of a tree when I can go outside and see a real tree? Years later, Faulkner said, sometimes the best fiction is more true than journalism. Why do we have to recreate things in order to get them? Why do we have to go to a theatrical play of people acting out life? Why don't we just live life?
Well, I think I think the purpose of art is you know, not necessarily to is to condense and recreate something, and put it in some sort of metaphorical or you know, artistic sense that makes people, you know, be able to say, yes, that's the feeling that I have. I mean, that seems to be something that people need, and to be able to relate their random experiences, and have it projected upon them that this is actually a universal experience. And I think that's a function, you know, the function of art to, you know, condense and remake and, you know, put something in a metaphorical, you know, in a metaphorical sense that isn't necessarily, you know, to make people think of the reality in a metaphorical way. I'm really rambling here. But you know, the point is that's what art is for, and people, I think it's a, you know, basic need of the human organism to be able to have that art function there to, you know, condense meanings and make people realize that we're all in together in this.
No, I like that. That was good. In fact, I'm curious, David, your tipping points when you decided to say, hey, I'm going to pursue poetry sort of as a calling, and I'm going to pursue music as a calling. Did you go to college to study specifically, you know, music and poetry, or where was that tipping point where you said, that's what I want to do?
I probably really got the bug when I moved to Penfield. I was kind of a loner kid. I was always a movie buff, but when I moved to Penfield, I suddenly got really into which was right before my sophomore year in high school, right before 10th grade. Anyhow, the Penfield Library was much better than the small town library, and I really got into James Thurber and the New Yorker humorists. I thought those guys were like the bee's knees, and I spent most of my high school going through the 1920s and 30s humorists, the New Yorker guys, and obsessively reading about that. So I think I had like a little dream of being some sort of a writer back then. Um, I ended up going to Syracuse University in 70 for the 76-77 season. I was got a major in communications and film. I take it back, English and communications. And I went to Syracuse for a year. I was a good student. I was on the dean's list my second semester, but for some reason I just completely cracked up. And I said, I can't do 3 years of college. I need to go live life. And so I packed myself up with a guitar and a suitcase, and took $800 out of the bank account that I'd earned at Friendly's Ice Cream, and went to Los Angeles in order to become a world famous comic folk singer. And I ended up staying in Los Angeles for the better part of 5 years. So Los Angeles was pretty much my college. And I forget, what was the question? Oh,
Well, what part of LA were you in for those 5 years?
Mostly in the Mar Vista area.
Really? Wow. Did you have like sort of role models for comic folk singing? Was it like Tom Lear or Tommy Smothers, or who did you appreciate comic folk singing wise?
Those guys were great. I liked the Bonzo Dog Band.
Oh yeah.
They were hilarious. You know, um, I listened to all the stand-up comedians, back in those days, Mel Brooks, Bob Newhart, Woody Allen, Bill Cosby, all those guys. I had their routines memorized.
Wow. And so what about poetry wise? So then after your 5 years in LA, you moved back to upstate.
I never went back to upstate New York. And poetry was like the least of my thoughts when I first hit LA. I was, I had my little comic folk songs, and for my college major, I still had like thoughts about being a journalist and stuff like that.
Right. And so then when did the poetry bug hit you? What was the tipping point to say, I'm going to start writing poetry?
Um, Actually, I mean, as a writer, I always like wrote little poems sometimes. I think most of the major writers did, or Ernest Hemingway, wrote a bunch of crappy poems in the 20s that actually got published.
Yeah.
Thurber wrote poems. And at the time, a poem was something to write. If I couldn't think of anything else to write and just wanted to keep my hand in, I would just, think of some random piece of nonsense and write a little poem just to get the engine started.
Right.
But I really didn't think about writing poems seriously until I moved to Seattle. So I went from LA. I lived in LA from 77 to 82. And then I lived in San Francisco for the better part of 3 years. Then I lived in Ashland, Oregon for 3 years. And then I moved to Seattle in 1987. And it was in Seattle that I first started, kind of getting into the poetry scene. There was a group there called Red Sky Poetry Theater, which had a very long-lived open mic. And I had actually started writing as a newspaper humorist for the Seattle Sunday Times. They had a freelance humor column at the beginning of the magazine section, and I started being one of the regular contributors to that. I figured I can't just write, fluff for the newspapers. I need to be where the avant-garde artists are, and so that was Red Sky Poetry. And so I think hanging out with them, they were kind of like an old bunch of beat poets kind of a thing, and it was a lot of fun being there. And started writing poetry and getting in their little publications and anthologies, and that kind of, you know, gave me more of a bug for doing it myself.
Yeah, that's interesting. Great scene up there. Do you know Baby Gramps? He was a hero in the.
I've seen Baby Gramps several times.
Yeah.
Actually, we were just talking about him the other day because he hasn't been on the radar lately. So I wonder, and if he passed away, I probably would have found out. So I don't know if he's still on the scene or in the home or what.
All these questions I'm asking you, I asked him a couple years ago. He's a really good human being and an amazing musician. I love him dearly.
So how's he doing?
Well, currently, I probably haven't talked in a year or two, so hopefully fine. But when this ends, I'll send him an email and just update him. A screenwriting teacher told me great art is when you can clearly see the intention of the maker. Kubrick says the opposite. Great art is when you can clearly not see the intention of the maker. What role does intention play when you're writing a song or writing a poem? In your creative process, what role does intention play?
I try to make it so that intention doesn't play much of a role. I like ambivalence a lot better.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, I think I'm writing agitprop or something like that. So yeah, a lot of my humorous poems, you know, can kind of go both ways, and I like going both ways.
Yeah, that's good. Duchamp said there's no art without an audience. How much are you thinking of your listener or reader when you're writing your poem or song?
Well, as someone who classes himself kind of as a literary humorist in kind of a general sense, I generally think of an audience when I'm writing because I'm trying to think of things that will make people laugh. And so, you know, interspersed with whatever story I'm telling, there will be little things that I call, you know, the funny parts. And so when you write those, you try to envision if an audience will appreciate them. And, you know, art for me is communication. I mean, it's, you know, it's never paid me very much over the years. But on the other hand, it's kind of how I interact with the world. You know, it gives me an excuse to go out. It gives me an excuse to go out and interact with the world. You know, and so, you know, I'm interested in communicating. And, you know, one of the things about, you know, writing supposedly funny stuff, if you know, write it and then, you know, go out and read it in front of somebody and nobody laughs, then it's like we were talking about earlier on the show, and it's a language problem, and I have to go back home and fix it with language.
Right. McLuhan says everything we invent extends some humanness or human sensorium, like knife and fork extend our teeth, shutter in a camera extends our eyelid. Even non-tangible, say, religion or philosophy maybe could extend consciousness. What does the writing utensil extend for you? What humanness, whether it's the pen or a keyboard, what humanness does the writing utensil extend?
I think it's kind of what I said just in the very last question. You know, it extends my contact with others. You know,
Right.
my interfacing with, with humans. You know, I mean, you know, if I was on a, you know, I guess it's the famous question. You know, if you were on a desert island and knew you would never be rescued, would you still write? And, you know, some people will say yes, yes, and some people will say no, no. And I'm probably more in the, you know, I'd probably be kind of discouraged then and wouldn't be doing too much of that.
Yeah. Well, McLuhan loved to quote Steve Allen, behind every joke, there's a grievance. Any comment on that Steve Allen line?
I always liked that line. And most of my pieces are based on a grievance of some sort or other, so I can totally relate to that. You know, it's the way of working through your grievance in some ways. You know, that's why writing can be, you know, medicinal.
Yeah, I agree. What's the function of laughter?
Well, laughter is generally pleasant. It's a release. It's amusing. It's pleasant. It's something that makes you forget your own problems for a matter of a few seconds and just embrace the comicness of the universe. And so laughter is a great thing.
Yeah, Gurdjieff says the laughter is the reconciliation of yes and no. And I'm curious your thoughts on satire. I asked my friend who wrote comedy with Robin Williams, can satire be destructive? And he said, that's the job of satire. And I says, well, yeah, but if me or you draw a cartoon in a certain country and they kill us, some people think dying is destructive. But, Jonathan Swift said, he thought satire, he compared satire to a mirror in which people could see every face but their own. In fact, Frank Zappa saying, watch the Nazis run your town. Now go home and check yourself. You think we're singing about someone else. What's the function of satire?
Well, I think historically the function of satire has always been to, point out the injustices of the powers that be, and try to dismantle a system, or the ancient Roman satires were specifically about a system of government that was in place at the time. So I think it's satires tend to be more about the satirical function tends to be more attacking an institution, I think, rather than attacking the very soul of the individual. And anyhow, I lost the question.
No, that was good. It was what is the function of satire? But even to carry it on, that was good, David. That we grew up with Mad Magazine, and instead of seeing Rocky the movie, we could just read the satirical take on it in a magazine, and then it grew to that was the week that was, and then Saturday Night Live news, or Harry Shearer, or Colbert, or the Jon Stewart, satire news.
I don't consider all the. I mean, Mad Magazine, I think was most satirical at the very beginning when Harvey Kurtzman was doing it.
Yeah.
And it was just a poke in the eye of it was just so vulgar and off the wall that it was the poke in the eye of all decorum in the world kind of thing. But otherwise, Mad Magazine could just be silly. I mean, Don Martin's cartoons were silly. Saturday Night Live was frequently silly. I mean, a piece that you can label as satire. I think satire and humor are not necessarily, they could be in the same big bubble, but they're different things. So,
right.
The Killer Bees wasn't satire unless you're really stretching a point.
Yeah, but I'm saying in the long run, what's happened is a lot of younger people now get their news from Stephen Colbert, where it's a combination of hard news and satire.
I don't know the young people of which you speak, because I have a 27-year-old daughter, and none of her friends watch Stephen Colbert. That's for people in their 40s and 50s.
Wow. Okay, but again, let's erase the who's using it. It is satire news is consumed by people. And the basic question is, do you think satire news more pacifies or more activates people?
Oh, that's a hard one. I would probably go with pacifies more because laughter is a release, and and your good liberal can sit and laugh. It's kind of like I was saying about agitprop. Your good liberal can sit and laugh at Stephen Colbert and go up and go back to sleep and think that they've done something for the world or whatever.
Right.
Um, just I'm going to go off on an offshoot now, but you're mentioning all these late night, satirical, talk show hosts, and I'm just remembering, when Trump won in 2016, um, and this was the first time in living memory that this has ever happened, I think. But Jimmy Fallon and Colbert and every late night comedy show, every late night satirical show was going to be doing an election return. Johnny Carson never did that crap, did they?
Right.
No, they never did. They never got into that sort of stuff. But those guys were doing it because they were so sure that Hillary was going to win. It was just going to be a laugh fest all night about these goddamn losers thought they were going to be taking over America, and and a more crestfallen bunch of folks I never saw in my entire life.
Yeah.
You remember that day? That was a hell of a night, and but like I said, that was the first time that the talk show hosts were ready to pile on it. And I think if ever there was an example of all their satirical mojo, did it activate people or make them complacent? I think the passive and complacent. I think that's what happened. I think so.
I agree with you 100%. I think PBS with a lot of great political documentaries in the long run hijacks the revolution. In fact, Jean-Luc, go ahead.
I just want to throw this in too. PBS. I think my wife and I were visiting our daughter or something like that, or but it was literally the weekend before the election. It was like the Saturday before the Tuesday election, and PBS was showing their Hillary Clinton, The Making of the President, which was a short film that was pretty much based on the premise that she had won. And I figured the only reason they were showing it was because they figured the ratings would drop when she actually won, so we'll show it now. But that was something that PBS did then too, and it wasn't just the late show guys. PBS was showing The Making of the President, Hillary Clinton, and it's like, I can't explain it. I've never seen anything like it happen ever before, though.
Well, David, it's interesting because Jean-Luc Godard told Michael Moore when he did his Fahrenheit movie at Cannes Film Festival, he said this film is going to help Bush get elected. Now, it didn't help Bush get elected per se, but it galvanized pro-Bushers. So it's sort of like, I often ask the same question. This slew of political documentaries we've had over the last 20, 30 years, do they more activate or more pacify people? Because usually, you're Cindy Sheehan said it best, you're just talking to the choir, you're preaching to the choir, and there ain't even a choir. So, I sort of agree. I lean a little more towards pacifying. And, Bertolt Brecht, the playwright, said, I want art that activates people, not put you in a trance. But again, that is embracing the contradiction, because art that puts you in a trance could eventually lead to activating you. So who knows? It's like the mystery of art is we don't know if it activates or pacifies us.
Yes,
So let's go to music for a second. What you're listening to these musicians you listed, and then you started doing it yourself. What is the function of music?
Well, I mentioned that I'm a comic songwriter and stuff like that, but And to be honest, you know, I don't know if the people know how we met, but we met at Beyond Baroque, and I was making a spectacle of myself because I had found an old poetry book of mine that I left there in 2005. And so that made me very excited. Then you just spontaneously said, "Be on my show," and I said, "Wow, is it that random how he picks people?" I mean, let me throw this out as an example of what I was doing there.
Yeah.
Okay, so I like we said before, I was living on Venice Beach, or in the Mar Vista community, you know, in the late '70s, and this was literally so long ago they had just invented rollerblades.
Yeah.
And it came out, like I think it was 1979 actually, that a rollerblader had gone swooping down the boardwalk and hit an old lady and killed her. So the Grey Panthers wanted to start you know, a campaign to ban the boardwalk to rollerbladers.
Yeah.
And so, you know, my idea of, you know, something to write about this, you know, my way of contributing to the cause was to run home and write this song. So this is how it goes. Skating down Venice Boardwalk on a Sunday afternoon, feet moving to the rhythm of a Bee Gees tune. Minding my own business, so I knock a few old folks down. When suddenly Disco Roller Granny punches my thigh into ground round because she's here. All the surfers start to scowl. No one under 50 is safe when Disco Roller Granny's on the prowl. Once she was just an old lady, hobbling along on a cane, carrying a little bag of groceries down the bike path lane. Then a kid on a 10-speed runs out of control, and that sweet little old lady lands face down on a package of rolls. When she finally gets up, she knows that one thing is for real. We retired folks are goners unless we get us some wheels. Gone is that sweet little lady making brownies for Sally and Bill. It's time for the 80s. Disco Roller Granny wants to kill. She oils the bearings on her skates. In each hand a sharpened hat pin. Disco Roller Granny is ready for a spin. The beach is deserted. Thousands cower home in fear. The name of Disco Roller Granny is all that they need to hear. Anyhow, that's
bravo, dude. I rarely get people whipping through a killer blues, and it was funny too. And it still exists. You know that there was one disc. I've been on the Venice Boardwalk for 43 years studying all the performers. And there was a disco roller granny for about 35 of those years. She was always.
I've seen pictures of her. Yeah, I think she was a little bit after my time, but yeah.
Yeah. No, beautiful song, dude. It was really good. It really comes from, you know, who's carrying on that tradition well is Roy Zimmerman. Have you ever heard him?
No.
Look him up. Roy Zimmerman is like, hey, David, you're going to see the guy who carried on the tradition that you really, really, really well done. And you know, my friend says the 3 T's. In fact, a friend I met on the Venice Boardwalk playing music, the 3 T's of music are technique, theory, and taste. Like technique, you've learned how to play the blues and the guitar. Theory, you know what chords they are. How does one acquire taste?
Oh, you know, for one thing, there's a whole bunch of different tastes, and people will develop their own. I mean, it's pretty much just what you like and what you listen to, I guess. You know, over the years. Or you know, what connects with you. I mean, I mentioned the fact that I wanted to be a comic songwriter and stuff like that, and I listened to the comic songwriters. But what I really liked on records were the guys that really freaked out. The guys that went over John Lennon screaming his lungs out or something like that, or Neil Young going on like a wild tangent guitar solo or something like that. So and one of my favorite comic actors was Gene Wilder, whose stock and trade was getting so worked
Right.
up that it's almost like ranty. And so I try to incorporate that in some of my songs. I like to think there's kind of a volcano kind of bubbling over inside of me that could just go out. I don't know if that came
That's
across
great. It
for any.
it really happened a lot in my enjoyment of Bonzo Dudog Band and Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention. A lot of that music is always inspired me, and that was sort of that edgy comedy rock music. I love it.
Kind of over the top. Yeah, you don't know where the top is until you've
Over
gone
the
over it.
top. Yeah. That's like George Carlin said, the role of the comedian is to draw a line and then cross over it.
Mhm.
But Copeland has the four elements of music as melody, harmony, rhythm, and tone color. When you're writing a song, how do you integrate those? Is there any process or ritual or you in integrating those four?
I think you're giving me a lot more credit as a musician than I probably deserve. I just take whatever 4 or 5 loose chords are hanging around and put them in a standard form, and then write silly stuff over it.
So you usually write the melody first?
Um, generally I have a comic idea. I generally have a lyric in mind first, and then the style will will change, in terms of what kind of lyric it is. I mean, if it's a blues, it's going to be a blues, but if it's more of like a standard, quatrain or poem, then I'll try to figure out what kind of, folk or country form I can put that in. But generally it's the comic idea or the words that come first.
Yeah. The Brill Building songwriters, they said, what comes first, the lyrics or the melody? And they said the phone call. So McLuhan says song is slowed down speech. The reason cultures have different musical taste is ultimately connected to language difference. Any comment?
I think we can talk about song in the same way we were talking about art in the other ways. It's like we have language. Why do we need song? Well, song is a condensed or it's condensed or elongated, but it's done in such a form that it seems it communicates more than I'm not expressing that yet, but song is an art form that communicates directly to people in a way that other things don't, I guess.
Right. Well, Walter Pater said it. All art aspires to the condition of music, like painting, sculpture, architecture, all wishes it could be as cool as music. The way music communicates is sort of like unexplainable.
Yes. I mean, I think we were talking earlier about whether, one can think without language.
Yeah.
And music is probably the closest to that state. If you're just, if you've emptied your mind, if you emptied your mind and are listening to music, that's probably as close to that state as you can get, at least, as far as I've experienced. I mean, Zen monks might have a different experience, when they're, emptying their minds into the void or something like that. But yeah, pure music is the most, non-language based of all communications.
What's more fundamental, music or language?
I'd say language. I think it depends. I mean, if you mean fundamental to our existence as a species, I would say language.
Yeah. Tell me an instrumental that makes you laugh.
Oh, there is one too. No. There's a John Fahey instrumental called "Guitar Excursions into the Unknown." that generally gets a chuckle. I was trying to remember the name of it. I think it's off his fourth album. Al Wilson made him put it on the album. But yeah, John Fahey's "Guitar Excursions into the Unknown." I think.
Dude, I can't wait to hear it. I'm going to look it up. I love John Fahey.
Yeah.
So let's.
Yeah, it's on the fourth album, the one that has the 12-minute song about going to his ex-girlfriend's birthday party or something like that.
Yeah.
But anyhow, Guitar Excursions into the Unknown.
And let's talk about performance. Ruth Draper says the key is to bring the audience up onto the stage and into the scene with you. It is they who give you even more than you give them in the way of imagination and creative power. How do you do that?
Usually against my will. No, I actually am sort of I would call myself shy, but I generally don't go out and trying to mingle with the crowd all that much. I'm happy being alone quite a lot, and I also do have stage fright, on occasion. You never quite get over that depending on the circumstances, and so I think it's I think it's true. I mean, when I get up there, if I'm making people laugh or whatever, or entertain them, or or somehow entertaining them, it feels good, and I feel like I'm contributing to the general health of the species, and giving people a couple chuckles over the course of an evening out. So anyhow, yes, the audience is very important, and in terms of being a performer, it feels a lot better when you feel that the audience is with you. I mean, I'll go out there and do a reading or something like that, and if I get a good response like right away in one of my poems, if there's like a little chuckle there or something like that, and people respond right away, it's amazing how fast that empowers you, and you're able to keep on that roll. But if you're up there and it initially falls dead for a little bit, then you're feeling like you're working to start to get a response. I mean, well, do you do much public reading? Or I know your wife is a performer.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're going through, because she's a professional. She's sung Carnegie Hall, but I've sort of gotten over it, and I know what you're talking about, because it goes along with this Leonard Cohen quote. The only way you can sell a concert is to put yourself at risk. And if you don't do that, people know. What role does risk play in your performance?
Well, as a humorist, I think Dorothy Parker said once that being a humorist is the hardest job in the world, because anyone can say to you, "I don't think that's funny."
Yeah.
And so there's a risk factor in the kind, but it's a risk factor to every artist too. But
yeah,
that you get. I mean, but if you're a humorist, it hits you really fast, because you've done a minute's worth of material, and people just sat there like rocks, and so you're kind of in trouble, and you can try to win them back, but like I said, that makes it more work than empowering. That's probably why some people stop doing it after a while, because they don't want to deal with that hassle. I sort of consider it a challenge, and I consider it if I bomb, it's a challenge, and it's a small price to pay for the fact that I feel that I'm going out and trying to interact with the world.
That's
And,
good, because Frank Zappa said, "I'm a failure, but not a miserable failure." And you must know the Beckett, fail once and then fail again, better. But, Viola Spolin sort of helped start comedy improv in Chicago, pre, Second City and the Groundlings. And she said, if the audience cannot see your struggle to achieve something, they cannot root for you to achieve it. How has struggle worked in your process of being creative?
well, I think for all kinds of writers, but for a humorist especially, I mean, when I first lived in LA, I was very proud of myself because I got an article published in the LA Weekly that was, as a matter, I brought along a lot of show and tell stuff for this thing.
Yeah.
I didn't know if I was going to be using it or not, but anyhow, it was called Head Perks: Light Life of a Paraphernalia Salesman.
Nice.
And this article was published in 1980, June of 1980. The reason it got published is I was taking an extension course at UCLA called Writing the Offbeat Story, and the instructor knew Jay Levin of the LA Weekly.
Yes.
And in fact, it was the second year that the LA Weekly was in existence. And Jay came to our class the same day we were presenting our papers, one of our final projects. And my final project was this story. And after I read it, Jay said, that's the kind of crap we publish. And I said, great. So I sent it to him and got like a $35 check.
Oh, that is a great story. I've already interviewed Jay years ago, and he's already booked an upcoming date on he's going to do another interview on this podcast. So I'll be re-asking him all these questions. I love that. Jay is a great guy. He really did LA a service by holding up the LA Weekly for so many years. And, I always make fun. That's LA Weekly, WEAKLEY, the Weekly. No, that was good. I appreciate.
But getting back to your question, though, I mean, so that was like an early success, and I was thinking at the time, my classmates at Syracuse University are just graduating now and looking for a job, and I'm already a published LA journalist, so I was feeling pretty good about myself for about 3 seconds. But anyhow, nothing ever happened after that article, and I think it was like a good 9 years before I got something published on an equivalent scale, which was at the Seattle Times. But you were asking whether writers or humorists need to suffer, and I think yes. I think my perspective as a 30-year-old writer who'd been kicked around a lot more probably reverberated more than the attitude of a 21-year-old punk kid who was being snarky.
What does courage mean to you now?
I wouldn't know. I'm not being a particularly courageous person. I'm just try to live my life and do the right thing and harm no others. That's good enough for me.
That's truly righteous. In fact, Ben Ratliff wrote a book on the jazz guitarist Bill Frisell, and he says, I mean sound as it has long functioned among jazz players, as a mystical term of art, as in every musician finally needs a sound, a full and sensible embodiment of their artistic personality, such that it can be heard at best in a single note. Like me and you could hear Miles Davis when you go, oh, that's Miles. And Ben said he's fragile and pointed. We could hear John Coltrane and say, oh, he's slightly undercooked and urgent. If a writer was to describe either your poem or your song, and you thought they got it in a couple words, what two words would you feel grateful describing David as a poet or a songwriter?
Uh, I, I was complimented by a Seattle poet once, who the Seattle poet and organizer, who was um, putting together a poetry festival. Anyhow, someone mentioned my name, and I think Paul's comment about me is at at his best, he's riotously funny.
Yeah.
And that has the qualifier "at his best" at the beginning of it to make me feel honest, because yeah, but
That's good.
but yes, I liked that.
That's really good. What's more important, conviction or compromise?
I don't think they're necessarily opposites. You can have conviction and still try to compromise because you live in the world. I mean, everyone doesn't get their wishes 100% all the time. And it's like, if I have to settle for 75%, have I betrayed my convictions? And it's like, no, you've, lived in the world and you fought for your convictions. You got 75%. So I don't see a dichotomy there.
In your accomplishments, how do you rate these three elements, luck, skill, and ambition? What played the biggest role, second and third?
Well, you're talking to a failed writer for one thing. So I don't have any plateau to look down and say, thank God my career, was this. But I think all three things play out. I mean,
Yeah.
luck, skill, ambition, talent, vision,
Yeah.
it's all a mix, and it's kind of random at how it happens. I mean, the only consistent thing about it is that the person, is that the artist is always present when an opportunity arises.
There you go. I like that. T.S. Eliot said poetry is outing your inner dialogue. What language is your inner dialogue in?
French. It's an absolute French inner dialogue. I don't remember any of my high school French, but the spirits of Rimbaud and Apollinaire, speak through me with my translation. Yes.
Two of my film heroes, their mantras. George Manupelli says, ignore yourself. Jonas Mekas says, there is no self-expression. And the great jazz pianist Cecil Taylor says, I'm just a vehicle and this stuff just comes through me. Is art making, poetry writing, songwriting, more self-expression or more you're a vehicle for whatever cultures and technologies and environments are dominant?
I think it's a combination of both. I mean, I generally try to write about, even if I'm writing about something else, I think it's a reflection of some of my feelings, that get expressed or expunged through it or whatever. So, I think it's both things happen. You're making a statement and you're also expressing your feelings about something. I mean, you know, I I've never written I've never written a strict memoir, going through day by day of what happened in my life or whatever. But I can read a poem that I wrote during a particular time of my life and remember that time of my life that, has nothing to do with the poem, but what I was feeling at that time. And sometimes I think that there is an underlying feeling in the poem that reflects the time that I wrote it.
Right. Can art making be egoless?
I I I would say on a fundamental level, no. I mean, oops. Sorry, the battery wire was getting a little bit low. I think even the artists that were like, Michelangelo painting the Sistine Chapel or whatever. I'm sure deep down in his heart he really believed that he was doing this for God. But if he hadn't been enough of an egotist to learn how to paint like that, he never would have been in that position. So he must have been a kid with a lot of ambition and skill and luck to get where he was. And
Yeah.
those sound like ego things. But if he was using it for something that he considered beyond ego, that's one thing. But it was still ego that got him there. So I don't know.
What was the motive of the cave artist? Your guess or hunch?
Yeah, I honestly don't know, or they would have been like, the equivalent of the old hobo signs during the Great Depression, where the hobos had different symbols, like you can eat here for a piece of pie, or this guy's got a dog that'll attack you, or something like that. And so the cave art could have been just saying things like good deer hunting here, or on the other hand, it could have been something that they made with an eye for posterity, saying, Bork killed 8 deer this day, and it'll be here forever in this cave, a record of that great achievement. So one, a signpost or a record, who knows?
I like that. Evoked the joke I love to tell. What's the difference between a hobo and a bum? A bum says, "Do you have a spare cigarette?" A hobo goes, "Smoking alone?"
Yeah.
Is perception reality?
Again, it's Samuel Johnson and The Rock.
Yeah.
It's some sort of reality.
Yeah.
I don't believe that the entire world is just an illusion that comes through my brain. I mean, you can make a philosophical point that it's like that, but it just doesn't feel right. There's a planet out there and there's stuff on it. I mean, we're perceiving it through, our little, post-evolution, eyeballs that we got from the apes or whatever. And so who knows what things will look like, 5,000 years from now. But anyhow, yes, perception is part of reality.
Yeah. Lewis Carroll says, "I believe as many as 6 impossible things before breakfast." Have you believed in any impossible things lately?
No, and I don't think of anything before breakfast except, getting my first cup of coffee and just cursing the day that I was born. There's no impossible thoughts flitting through my head. He was a brainy guy. He was a mathematician. They think differently. God bless him. But that's the reason I didn't follow Dad into engineering. I didn't want to be thinking about impossible thoughts when I woke up.
David, tell me one major element of your creativeness in poetry and song that's changed, in one major element that stayed the same in the years you've been doing it.
I think my writing's gone through a whole bunch of different phases over the years that I've been doing it. I started out doing silly comedy songs. Farted around journalism. Wrote Sunday newspaper humor columns. I wrote piles of these. Let's see. When I was in Seattle, I wrote for you ever hear Exquisite Corpse?
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Andre Codrescu's magazine.
Oh, yeah.
I wrote a serial for that called The Diary of Nanette Jenkins. It was in it was in a few of the later print issues, and then it was in both of his cyber issues, and then the Black Sparrow Press anthology came out, and the chapter of that was in it.
Cool.
So I tried, kind of parodistic novel writing, comic essays, and I've been going down the poetry road for the past several years. There was a period. I actually got a grant from the Tacoma. I got a grant from the city of Tacoma for publishing this in 2003. It's called "Diary of a Homeless Alcoholic, Suicidal Maniac, and Other Picture Postcards." Anyhow, they gave me $3,000 to publish this, which went a long way at the time. It was a big boost for me. I was very happy to get that money. But that was basically poetry.
Yeah.
A lot. One of the things I can do with poetry that I couldn't as a prose writer is I could be serious in poems sometimes.
Yeah.
I mean, when I was doing prose or songs, they of necessity had to be a song that, or a piece that got a laugh after a page or a stanza. Poetry kind of freed me up. I could mix it up. I could, just write about something for, a page or two without any, visible yucks in it. And that was a little bit freeing. But that being said, humor is still a big part of the poetry. So I would imagine humor would be the element that would, be the tie-in for everything that I've done. Yeah.
Really good, David. Moshe Feldenkrais works with healing and movement. He says it's literally possible to identify a weakness and incorporate it to become a strength rather than we're normally taught to overcome a weakness. Tell me a weakness you turned into a strength.
I guess it just goes back to being, like the the skinny kid that was always picked on in school, kind of a thing. I didn't turn it into a strength, but well, in some ways I did, I guess. I mean, kids like that, use different, things to get out of that, humor, or a way of interacting with the world.
Yeah.
And so I would say, just being kind of like, the geek kid, learning personality traits to overcome that was, something that I worked to my advantage. I mean, yeah, I guess the old cliche about, oh, they're beautiful, but they're so shallow, and it's like, yeah, those guys, But
What's the most significant difference between men and women, physical aside?
hard place to answer that because I mean, there's physical aside and there's societal roles too. But if you put societal roles aside, also, I thought men and women are pretty close to being equivalent.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. That's interesting how few people say that, but I love to hear it. There's a line that goes, "You create what you resist." Bob Goldthwait, the comedian, morphed it into, "You are what you hate." In fact, James Joyce said, "It's a curious thing how your brain is super saturated with the religion in which you say you disbelieve." And Louis Buñuel nailed it. He said, "Thank God I'm an atheist." Any comment on this line, "You create what you resist"? And I'm not saying you, David, or one creates what one resists. Any thoughts on that line?
Buñuel might have a point. I mean, I love Buñuel, but the role of the atheist seems to be, spending a lot of energy debunking a religion, and you know, it's a big focus. It's that one thing that we do. You know, it's our one subject matter, and it's like I think religion got back at you if you narrow your life down a little bit too far that way.
David, can you forget to die?
I guess I'll find out.
How do you find peace of mind?
Well, I'm older now, and so I don't, and you know, I think a lot of my striving days are over. So, just getting up and doing what do what I'm supposed to be doing. As I've, worked it out these past, 45 plus years of adulthood, you know, that pretty much does it for me nowadays. I mean, when I was younger, I'd always be tearing my hair out. Oh, I'm stuck in this horrible job and it's taking time from my great art and all this other crap. I'm at the point where like I said earlier on the show, I did the best I could with what I got, with what I had, and however it worked out, I can say that, so that's fine. So I think it's just part of the aging process, I guess. I mean,
very cool. We just got a few more minutes, a few more questions. Thanks again.
I guess I have to go to the bathroom soon.
These are 5 quick Alan Watts questions, just off the top of your head in a couple words. Who started it all?
Homer.
Are we going to make it?
Well, at least they'll be at least until I die. So yeah, I give us that much future.
Where do we put it?
They're putting me in the fireplace when I go, and then they're throwing the ashes. I want to be like the Big Lebowski. I want my family to drive down Santa Monica Pier and throw it off the edge of the pier.
4, who's cleaning it up?
Not me.
5, is it serious?
Probably not.
If you were walking down the street today and you met yourself as a 12-year-old, what would you say to your 12-year-old self?
Well, I think along those lines a lot, which is probably not a great way to think, but and I don't do it too obsessively. But sometimes I wonder, like when I think about the LA days or something like that, I said, you think about opportunities missed, or whatever, and I think someone posed the question once, if you could be 25 again, would you do it? And the first question the guy asked was, would I know what I know now back in the 25-year-old guy?
Yeah.
Yeah. And the guy said, no, you'd just be going back and you'd be 25 again. And, the answer to the first question, can I go back and be 25 with my, 65-year-old knowledge? Yeah. But can I go back to 25 and do it all over again, being the same idiot? No, nobody wants to do that.
Tell me something good you never had and you never want.
A beachfront house in Hawaii.
If you were in a vat of vomit up to your neck and someone threw a bag of shit at your face, what would you do?
I'd say, thank you. It's been great playing here at the Comedy Store.
What's the cultural shift you see developing today that inspires you?
I'm, like I said, I have the 27-year-old daughter, and I poke my head out, looking for music or literature that, might be something that I, need to be reading or whatever. But I find myself, going into old fogey mood a lot. Right now I'm reading that huge Warhol biography that came out just a couple years back by Brad. Anyhow, there's like it's a 900-page Warhol biography.
Yeah.
So I tend to just go back in arts movements of the past. You know, things change all the time in the arts. I mean, the 20th century was like, the century of cinema. I don't think, cinema as it existed in the 20th century is happening today.
Yeah.
All the art forms are sort of in flux. I can't really figure them out. There's nothing there that I particularly want that speaks to me that's new. So I just go back to old stuff. So I really don't know, whither goes the culture or whither goes the art scene.
Yeah. Well, go ahead. Okay. Well, Thornton Wilder said in 1928, art is confession. Art is the secret told. But art is not only the desire to tell one's secret, it's the desire to tell it and hide it at the same time. You've laid your cards on the table for 90 minutes. I'm not insinuating you haven't already answered this. What's it really all about for you?
Like I said, art was something to do. I mean, it was my way of interacting with the universe. It was my way of having ambition. It was my way of making me do something, pushing myself out of the box and taking chances or whatever. And if I'd gone through life getting no positive feedback whatsoever, I might be a little bit discouraged. But, over the years, there has always been like, a little pocket of something good happening that, gives you the courage to go on. But, and that's swell too. So I don't know. I thought art was a swell vocation to have, live in life. And, it brought me in contact with the world such as I made it. And so I'm good with it.
Great. David, what gives you the most optimism?
Kids are still kids. I mean, like I said, I have a 27-year-old daughter. No grandkids, and she doesn't have any domestic partner right now, which suits me fine. But she's an artist. She's an artist in Port. She does graphic and ceramic art in Portland. She works at a tiny house village for the homeless program there, and she's living her life and trying to do her own things and trying to make the world a better place. And so that's sort of encouraging. There's still kids out there doing that.
Yeah, that's the answer I get the most is youth, children, kids, and young people. And making the world a better place is what I'm all about. And I love it to just hear those words together. The first question is, what's the best thing for a human being? Wilhelm Reich said the best thing for a human being is another human being. And the last question is, what gives you the most optimism? I got that from the question they asked Groucho Marx at the end of his life, and he said, other people. Mm-hmm. So it's sure been fun spending this time with another person. David, thank you so much. It was truly enlightening, and I appreciate your time and energy.
Okay, and yeah, we try to get down to LA like every year or so at this point in our lives. In fact, someday I'd like to winter down there. Get out of the Pacific Northwest for like January and February. But anyhow, the next time we're down there, maybe we'll run into each other or whatever.
Sounds great. I love meeting at Beyond Baroque. It's truly a great place for poets and music and art. So even though I'm going to hit the end broadcast button, I hope our conversation can keep going on forever and ever. Thank you so much, David.
All right.